Let me tell you a story that's going to blow your mind. On January 23rd, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order about Bitcoin. The media said it was great for crypto. Wall Street cheered. Bitcoin shot up to $100,000. Everyone thought America was just supporting digital money and innovation. But they got it completely wrong. This wasn't about cryptocurrency at all. This was about war. Not the kind with tanks and missiles, but something potentially more powerful. Economic war. Currency war. Trump just told the world that America plans to control Bitcoin the same way it's controlled the dollar for the last 75 years. And China? They saw it immediately. Bitcoin is the first truly neutral money that exists outside any government's control. No government can print more of it. No central bank can manipulate it. No military can seize it if you store it properly. For 75 years, America has dominated the entire world through control of the dollar. The dollar is what's called the world's reserve currency. That means 70% of all international trade happens in dollars. 60% of all money held by central banks around the world is in dollars. This gives America insane power. If you want to buy oil, you need dollars. If you want to access the global banking system, you need dollars. And here's the scary part. If America doesn't like you, they can cut you off from dollars completely. This is economic dominance used as a weapon. America has used this weapon repeatedly. Sanctions on Russia. Sanctions on Iran. Sanctions on Venezuela. They froze Afghanistan's dollar reserves. They cut countries off from SWIFT, which is the global payment system. Every single time America does this, the rest of the world realizes something terrifying. Their wealth, their reserves, their ability to trade can all be taken away if Washington gets mad at them. So, naturally, they've been looking for alternatives. For decades, China has tried to make their currency, the Yuan, into a global currency that competes with the dollar. They've tried everything. They've made currency swap agreements with other countries. They've tried to get people to buy oil with yuan instead of dollars. They've pushed to get included in international monetary organizations. But none of it has worked. The yuan is still only 2.7% of global reserves. Basically nothing. Why hasn't it worked? Because nobody trusts China. The Communist Party controls the yuan completely. They manipulate its value whenever they want. They restrict how money flows in and out of China. They can crash its value overnight if they feel like it. It's surveillance money, so the world keeps using dollars even though they hate American. Bitcoin is different. It doesn't belong to any country. It's decentralized. There's a fixed supply that can never change. No single entity controls it. For China, this represented a potential way to escape dollar dominance without needing the world to trust Chinese institutions. If global trade could happen in Bitcoin instead of dollars, America loses its weapon. This is why China tolerated Bitcoin for years, despite being an authoritarian government that usually hates things it can't control. They saw strategic value, but they also saw danger. Because if Bitcoin becomes a major global reserve asset, whoever controls the most Bitcoin has enormous influence. Not absolute control like with the dollar, but huge influence. And if America gets there first, if America piles up 1 million Bitcoin before China acts, then Bitcoin just becomes another dollar. An asset America can weaponize. An American tool instead of a neutral alternative. This is what Trump's executive order means to China. America is declaring its intention to dominate Bitcoin, to pile up massive reserves before anyone else can, to turn Bitcoin into a dollar 2.0, an American strategic asset instead of a neutral alternative. And China absolutely cannot allow this to happen. Because if America succeeds, China loses twice. They lose the dollar system they're desperately trying to escape, and they lose the Bitcoin alternative they hoped would replace it. They'd be locked into American financial dominance for another generation, maybe forever. So Trump's executive order forced China's hand. They have to respond. They have to compete for Bitcoin. They have no choice. This is an arms race, and it started the second Trump signed that order. Now let me show you exactly what China is doing. The response is happening on multiple fronts right now. First, Bitcoin mining. In 2021, China banned Bitcoin mining. They said it was about energy use and climate change. That was the public story, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was control. China's government couldn't control mining that was happening inside China by regular people and private companies. So they banned it. Bitcoin miners fled to other countries: Kazakhstan, the United States, Russia. China's share of global Bitcoin mining went from 75% to basically zero in just 6 months. China is now redirecting this power to mining. They're building mining farms in Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, and Western provinces. Government funding, no regulations blocking them, unlimited power at cost. They're targeting 20 to 30% of all global Bitcoin mining by the end of 2026. If they hit that target, they'll be mining about 140 Bitcoin every single day. That's 51,000 Bitcoin per year. Within 3 years, China could have an additional 150,000 Bitcoin just from mining. Combined with what they already have, China could control 250,000 to 300,000 Bitcoin by 2028. This is a direct response to Trump's goal of 1 million Bitcoin. China can't match 1 million, but they can get enough to prevent American monopoly. Enough to remain a major player in any Bitcoin-dominated money system. Second, buying Bitcoin directly. China holds $3.2 trillion in foreign currency reserves. That's the largest in the world. Most of this is U.S. Treasury bonds and dollars, assets they want to move away from. For years, they've been slowly selling Treasury bonds. They went from $1.3 trillion in 2013 down to $731 billion today. They've been buying gold instead. They've added over 1,000 tons in the last 3 years. Official reserves are now 2,350 tons. Unofficial reserves held by state-controlled entities and the military are estimated at 6,000 tons or more. But gold is physical. It's heavy. It's hard to move around. Bitcoin is digital, borderless, infinitely portable. Perfect for a country that needs to diversify reserves without American approval. Third, the digital yuan. China has been developing a central bank digital currency called the Digital Yuan, or ECNY, since 2014. They've run the world's largest digital currency test. Over 260 million people have used digital yuan wallets. Over $100 billion in transactions. The goal was to create programmable, government-controlled digital money that could compete with the dollar in international trade. But the digital yuan had a major problem. Nobody outside China wanted to use it. Why? Because it's controlled by the Communist Party. They can freeze your account. They can track every single transaction. They can crash its value whenever they want. It's surveillance money. So international adoption was basically zero. Trump's Bitcoin order gave China a new strategy. They're now positioning the digital yuan as Bitcoin-backed. Not fully backed, but partially backed with Bitcoin reserves. The messaging is subtle, but clear. The digital yuan will be exchangeable for Bitcoin at official rates set by the People's Bank of China. This makes the digital yuan more attractive than pure government money while maintaining government control. China can issue digital yuan knowing it's backed by an asset that goes up in value Bitcoin, that has no risk of default. And they can offer other countries the ability to trade in digital yuan with the promise that it can be converted to Bitcoin if needed. And Bitcoin backing makes it possible. This is why Trump's executive order forced China to act. Because if America piles up Bitcoin first and offers a Bitcoin-backed dollar or Bitcoin-backed treasury security, China's strategy fails completely. The race is on. Fourth, BRICS coordination. BRICS is an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It recently expanded to include Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. These countries represent 45% of the world's population and 35% of global GDP. They've been talking about alternatives to the dollar for years, but working together has been difficult because they don't trust each other. Russia doesn't trust China. India doesn't trust China. Brazil doesn't trust anyone. But Trump's Bitcoin executive order created alignment. Because now they all see a common threat: America weaponizing Bitcoin the same way it weaponized the dollar. At the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, in October 2024, members discussed creating a BRICS currency, or payment system. The details were vague, but after Trump's executive order, the discussions went into overdrive. China is now proposing a BRICS Bitcoin reserve, a shared pool where each BRICS nation contributes Bitcoin to collective reserves managed by a multilateral institution. Think of it like the IMF's special drawing rights, but backed by Bitcoin instead of government currencies. For 27 years, this worked. But then America started cheating. The Vietnam War cost too much. Social programs cost too much. America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them up. By 1971, foreign governments noticed. France demanded gold for its dollars. Britain demanded gold. Switzerland, Germany, Japan, all demanding gold. America's gold reserves were draining. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. He stopped letting people exchange dollars for gold. Temporarily, he claimed. It still stopped 54 years later. The dollar became pure paper money, backed by nothing except America's promise and military might. And this worked for another 50 years because America remained the dominant military and economic power. But that dominance is fading, and the world is looking for alternatives again. Just like Keynes proposed in 1944, Bitcoin is the modern bancor, a neutral money that no single country controls. This is why it threatens America. Because if the world adopts Bitcoin as a reserve asset, America loses the incredible privilege of printing the reserve currency. China understands this. They learned from Bretton Woods. They watched America dominate for 80 years because they controlled the money system. China doesn't want to replace American dominance with Chinese dominance. They know the world won't accept that. They want a multi-country system where Bitcoin is the neutral reserve and the yuan, dollar, euro, and others compete on merit. This is why China is pushing BRICS Bitcoin reserves and Bitcoin-backed digital yuan rather than trying to make the yuan the sole reserve currency. They learned from history. Single-country dominance creates enemies. Multi-country systems create stability. And China thinks long-term. They're playing the 100-year game. America, with Trump's executive order, is playing the 4-year game, trying to dominate Bitcoin before the next election. This short-term thinking versus long-term strategy is why China might actually win this currency war. Not by defeating America, but by creating an alternative system that enough of the world prefers. Let me show you the timeline of how this currency war escalates over the next few years. 2025. The opening moves. Trump signs the Bitcoin executive order in January. China responds with mining mobilization and secret purchases. Russia announces it will accept Bitcoin for oil and gas exports. Iran starts mining Bitcoin with excess natural gas that would otherwise be wasted. Saudi Arabia, hedging between America and China, quietly begins buying Bitcoin through sovereign wealth funds. India, always independent, announces its own Bitcoin reserve separate from BRICS. The narrative is confusion. Nobody knows who's buying how much. Prices swing wildly. Bitcoin ranges between $80,000 and $150,000. By year-end, America holds about 150,000 Bitcoin through seizures and purchases. China holds about 150,000 through mining and purchases. Russia holds about 50,000. BRICS collectively holds 300,000. The race is tied, but the direction is crystal clear. Nation-states are piling in. 2026, the acceleration. America ramps up acquisition hard. The Treasury authorizes open market purchases. The Federal Reserve creates a Bitcoin custody facility. America buys 250,000 more Bitcoin through direct market operations. Total U.S. holdings, 400,000 Bitcoin. China responds by increasing mining to 25% of all global Bitcoin mining. They purchase another 150,000 Bitcoin through secret OTC deals and proxy companies. Total China holdings, 300,000 Bitcoin. The BRICS Bitcoin Reserve becomes official. Members contribute their Bitcoin. Total BRICS Reserve, 600,000 Bitcoin, of which China controls 40%. So China directly holds 300,000 and indirectly controls 240,000 more through BRICS. Russia leverages its energy dominance. They announce Bitcoin mining facilities powered by natural gas that would otherwise be burned off as waste. They mine another 50,000 Bitcoin. Iran does the same, mining 25,000 Bitcoin. The Middle East starts accepting Bitcoin for oil, first in small amounts, 5% of payment in Bitcoin, then 10%. By the end of 2026, 15% of global oil trade accepts Bitcoin as partial payment. This is the beginning of the Petro-Bitcoin system, and it directly attacks the petrodollar system that has kept America dominant since the 1970s. 2027, the crisis year. Bitcoin price has surged to $300,000 due to nation-state buying. Regular investors and companies are priced out. Volatility is extreme. America announces its holdings have reached 650,000 Bitcoin. They're two-thirds of the way to the 1 million target. But America's budget deficit is exploding. The trade war with China has crushed GDP growth. Tax revenues are falling. The government is borrowing $5 trillion per year. Bond markets are unstable. The Federal Reserve is forced to print money to buy Treasury bonds. The dollar is weakening. China sees an opportunity. They announce that the digital yuan is now officially backed by Bitcoin reserves. One digital yuan is exchangeable for a specific amount of Bitcoin at official rates. This is the financial nuclear option, because it positions the digital yuan as harder money than the dollar. Countries holding digital yuan reserves now have indirect Bitcoin exposure without needing to store Bitcoin themselves. Adoption explodes. Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Pakistan, large parts of Africa switch to digital yuan for trade with China. BRICS nations begin settling all BRICS trade exclusively in BRICS currency units backed by the Bitcoin reserve. About 20% of global trade is now happening outside the dollar system. The dollar's share of global reserves falls from 58% to 50%. For the first time in 75 years, the dollar is no longer the majority reserve asset. This is the turning point, the moment when dollar dominance becomes dollar participation. America is still the largest economy. The dollar is still the most used currency, but it's no longer unchallengeable. The world is genuinely multipolar now, and Bitcoin is the neutral asset at the center. 2028 and beyond, the new order. Bitcoin stabilizes around $500,000 to $1 million per coin. Nation-states hold collectively over 3 million Bitcoin, about 15% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist. The rest is held by early adopters, corporations, and regular investors who never sold. The global money system is split in two. The Western system, dollar-based, U.S. Treasuries, NATO allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the traditional American sphere. The Eastern system, BRICS-based, digital Yuan with Bitcoin backing, BRICS currency units, China's sphere plus Russia, Iran, and swing countries. Both systems use Bitcoin as a reserve asset, but governance is separate. Neither side trusts the other, so Bitcoin serves as the neutral settlement layer. When West trades with East, final settlement happens in Bitcoin. Not dollars, not Yuan. Bitcoin. This is the new Bretton Woods. Except instead of the dollar as the sole reserve, Bitcoin is the neutral reserve, and government currencies compete for secondary use. It's messy, it's volatile, but it's more balanced than single-country American dominance. And it's what China wanted all along. Not Chinese dominance, but a system where China is an equal player with America, where the yuan and dollar coexist, where Beijing has as much influence as Washington. The currency war that began with Trump's executive order in 2025 ends not with American victory or Chinese victory, but with stalemate. A multipolar money order where Bitcoin is the ultimate reserve and geopolitics determines which government currency you use for daily transactions. Now, let me show you who wins and who loses in this scenario. Winners, China. They achieved their goal of escaping single-country dollar dominance and creating a multi-country system where they have equal influence. The yuan is now a legitimate international currency, Bitcoin-backed and trusted. They didn't replace America, but they don't have to. Equal footing is victory. Russia. They turned energy dominance into Bitcoin wealth. Their reserves are no longer vulnerable to Western sanctions. They can trade with China, Iran, and others using Bitcoin-backed systems. Western sanctions become meaningless. BRICS nations. Brazil, India, South Africa, and others gained money independence. They're no longer forced to use dollars or bow to American financial pressure. They trade in their own currencies backed by BRICS Bitcoin reserves. Early Bitcoin holders. The people who bought Bitcoin at $1,000, $10,000, $50,000, and held through everything. When Bitcoin hits $500,000 to $1 million, they're generationally wealthy. They own the neutral reserve asset that nations are fighting over. Gold holders who also held Bitcoin. They diversified into both hard assets. Gold goes to $10,000 per ounce as central banks keep buying. Bitcoin goes to $1 million. They preserved wealth through the currency transition. Losers. The United States government. They lost absolute dominance. The dollar is still important, but it's no longer the unquestioned king. America's ability to use sanctions as a weapon is weakened. They can still sanction within the Western system, but the Eastern system ignores them. This is a massive geopolitical loss. Dollar holders. The dollar lost 30 to 40% of its buying power during the transition. Inflation from money printing. Devaluation as reserve status eroded. People holding cash and dollar bonds got destroyed. The European Union. They hedged poorly, tried to create a digital euro, but nobody wanted it. ended up caught between American and Chinese systems. The euro remains a regional currency, never achieving global status. People who sold Bitcoin early. The people who sold Bitcoin at $50,000 thinking they made good money, then watched it go to $1 million. They missed the greatest wealth transfer in history. They had the asset, they just didn't hold it. So what should you do? First, understand that this currency war is happening whether you participate or not. America and China are competing for Bitcoin dominance right now. Your personal Bitcoin holdings are irrelevant to nations, but your personal wealth is massively affected by the outcome. Second, hold Bitcoin. Not because America or China will win, but because both sides are piling in. When nation-states compete to buy an asset, the price goes up. Basic supply and demand. The run to $1 million per Bitcoin isn't wild speculation. It's the math of the biggest entities in human history competing for a fixed supply asset. Third, don't keep all your Bitcoin on exchanges. Nation-states will pressure exchanges. America will demand customer data. China will demand cooperation from Asian exchanges. Your exchange-held Bitcoin is vulnerable to government action. Move it to self-custody. Hardware wallets, multi-signature setups, cold storage. If you control the keys, neither America nor China can take it during the currency war. Fourth, spread across jurisdictions. If you're American, consider holding some Bitcoin through foreign entities. Singapore, Switzerland, places that won't automatically cooperate with U.S. government demands. If you're Chinese, get Bitcoin outside China. Hong Kong before it got fully absorbed. Overseas exchanges. International custody. Don't let your government control all your access. Fifth, hold gold as insurance. Bitcoin is the focal point of the currency war, but gold is the traditional reserve asset. Central banks are buying both. If Bitcoin faces technical problems or gets attacked by regulations, gold is your backup. 10 to 20% of your hard asset allocation should be physical gold, stored outside the banking system. Sixth, expect wild swings. Currency wars are chaotic. Bitcoin will swing violently. 100,000 to 200,000, back to 120,000, up to 350,000, down to 200,000. These swings will be driven by nation-state buying, regulatory announcements, and geopolitical events. Don't panic. Don't try to trade it. Just hold. The long-term trend is up because supply is fixed, and demand from nations is structural, not temporary. Seventh, watch for signals. When China announces digital Yuan Bitcoin backing, that's a major escalation. When BRICS formalizes Bitcoin reserves, that's a major escalation. When oil-producing nations start accepting Bitcoin for energy, that's the Petro-Bitcoin moment. Each of these signals tells you the currency war is advancing. Each one pushes Bitcoin prices higher. Follow the news. Understand the geopolitical context. Position yourself accordingly. When the new money order is established, you'll either hold the asset both sides were fighting for, or you'll hold the paper money the loser printed. The choice is yours, and the clock is ticking.